guys. So for those who don't know the background of Philippe and Nicolas, Philippe, you're at Excel Partners, and that's one of Europe's leading venture capital firms. And Nicolas, as of this year, you're one of Europe's unicorns. BlablaCar is a ride-sharing company. It's worth over $1 billion now. And we're going to talk about how the two of you, the investor and the entrepreneur, can align to build a unicorn. So when did you guys meet? How does this relationship start?
So it's kind of interesting actually, because it started with nothing to do with startups or BlablaCar actually. So we met the first time I think in 2003, or whenever you moved to Silicon Valley. And back then I was already in startups in Silicon Valley actually, and Philippe moved to Silicon Valley to work for McKinsey. So he was working for McKinsey back then. And most of the relationship at the beginning was around skiing, right? So all we were doing was actually skiing together, and I guess that's how we built the initial relationship, right? And the first time we actually talked about BlablaCar was I think around, pretty much when the company was founded and when I met Fred doing an MBA at INSEAD. And that was around 2007, and I think that's the first time you've heard BlablaCar, which was not even called BlablaCar, actually.
I mean, the skiing part is interesting because we still go skiing together, and actually a lot of work gets done when you can be with someone for 2 or 3 days on a ski trip. From an investment standpoint, I mean, the funny thing is the first time that Nicolas presented BlablaCar, which was called Commuto at the time, I basically, and that was when Nicolas invested, some money as an angel, and my first reaction was like, this thing is it's never gonna work. You're gonna lose your entire money here. So that was a low start, and then, from them I got to better understand the concept. I thought that it was not about hitchhiking, but it was about building a global community. And then once I was at Bessemer in venture, I looked at the first round of Commuto in 2010, but it was still a bit early because it was a French company, so not the right fit for the funds. And then eventually, in 2011, I moved to Europe, and then it was the right time to invest in the company. And the important part is that I got to know Nicolas over 7 years before investing, and getting this trust with the team you invest in is something which is really key.
And it's kind of interesting because if you look at the story of BlablaCar, we had this very organic story at the beginning, right? Because Fred started the first website actually back in 2005, right? So the first idea was 2005. We formed the company late 2006. And if you think of it, we had the first employee in 2009, first investment in 2010. So there's been this sort of long story of not just building trust with investors, but building the team, actually the founding team running the company. And I think it's pretty powerful because when you spend so much time together and you start actually building a company at the scale where we want to build the company, I think it's pretty critical that you know people, you have we're very much aligned on the strategy of building the business. And
then you spend a lot of time talking to each other about that alignment. I mean, as you're building BlablaCar and before you're an investor, you have conversations where you're coming round to the idea of the strategy, or you kind of accept Nicolas' strategy? I mean, how does that bit come about?
Well, I mean, the first thing which was interesting, in our relationship is that when Axel invested in 2011, I was a principal at the firm. It was actually the first investment I did when I joined Axel. So, I had a lot of skin in the game.
It's a big bet for you, then.
Exactly, it was a big bet for me, but it was also a big bet for Nicolas, because he was just leaving a venture firm to move full-time to BlablaCar. So I think we both had, taking, some serious risk, a lot of skin in the game. And we also, I think, both share the vision that we are not here to build a great business in France. We're here to build something that, trying to reinvent long-distance transportation, and that needed to start with a global strategy.
Yeah, I guess moving beyond France, which is what BlablaCar has done very successfully. Well, can you give us an idea of some of the tough decisions that you've had to make in building the company, and it's situations like that where it's important that investors and entrepreneurs are on the same path and not in conflict?
Yeah, and to some extent, I think we had a few actually very tough decisions. But the first one was to some extent the investment from Axel, because what happened in 2011 was Fred, Francis, and I actually wanted to build this European company, right? And the French business was still very small, very misunderstood. No one knew about the concept. Everybody was very skeptical about this long-distance ride-sharing. They thought it was hitchhiking. They thought the market would be very tiny.
Right.
So it was like a pretty difficult bet, right? And essentially, at that moment, we decided to shift gear and think we're not a French company, we're a European company. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take more investment, even though it's pretty tiny in France today, we're going to take more investment and we're going to scale the service all over Europe. And it was pretty critical to get, again, like strong alignment between the founders. We had very strong alignment between the founders. For me to come back essentially full time, and for Philippe and Axel actually to back the company with 10 million. And I remember back then and I'm sure you had some feedback on that, but when people saw the investment from Axel of $10 million in BlablaCar, which was not even called BlablaCar, people were like very surprised, and they thought like, what the hell is going on? Why is Axel doing that? It's a hitchhiking website, a bunch of hippies running a company. So it was actually the most controversial investment, and it was probably harder and much more of a turning point for the company than any of the bigger fundraising we've done later on, right? So we raised like $300 million after that, but in a way it was probably more incremental to some extent than the first 10 million to change the DNA of the company.
Right.
Yeah, and the first thing we had to demonstrate at the time was that BlablaCar could work outside of France. And one of the things, so when we did our due diligence on the investments, one of the things we did is we tried to identify, so what are the other companies in Europe, in other European countries doing the same thing. And doing this, we found, a company in Italy which was small. It was like 2 people, but very good guys. And we said, well, it's not an investment that we want to make, but it could be actually a very interesting acquisition, an acqui-hire for BlablaCar. And so even before closing the deal, while we're still, kind of post-term sheet in the legal process, I'm like, Nicolas, why don't you talk to these guys? Because that could be a great way to start a new country.
Right, you're doing kind of early matchmaking for all the other people that could help build out BlablaCar, even if they're building their own businesses in different countries. Are there other examples of you did that? You did that in Italy, but you've done that beyond?
So we've done that so for Italy, Poland, and Russia.
Right.
So these are 3 teams that we identified through our network and then introduced to the company.
And Russia's a big risk as well. I mean, how do you get around to launching in Russia in this day and age?
That was a very interesting decision. So I think we had in terms of tough decisions, we had. I probably remember 2. So we'll get to Russia, but the first one was actually Germany,
okay.
right? Because we had a big competitor in Germany called carpooling.com, or actually Mitfahrgelegenheit as it was known in Germany. And back in 2010, actually, before the investment from Axel, there was a company actually we could buy called Mitfahrzentrale, which was very well known in Germany doing this long distance ride sharing. And back then we just didn't have the cash, right? So we were left with this frustration of, that was the entry point for Germany, and we did not have enough funding to do it, and it was not rational to do it. And then years later, so it was back in 2013 actually, when we had a lot more momentum, we always wanted to launch Germany, but we could not, right? So essentially, there was a player in Germany, it was very hard to enter. And they started to pivot their model, and there was a moment where we could enter Germany. And I remember we had this a crazy board meeting where they just announced the news. I think it was the day before the board, and we said, okay, guys, we need to run into Germany. So we need to probably double down, raise another $10 million as soon as we can, and launch Germany. And we decided that on the board, and 3 weeks later, we were in Germany and we had raised $10 million. And it shows essentially, unless you have phenomenal alignment with your investors, with the board, with the entire company, you cannot do that. And it was probably one of the best moments, actually, I remember with at the company, because we went back from the board meeting, which was in the basement, actually. We had this boardroom in the basement. And we went back up with Fred and Francis, and the team was waiting. They were like, so are we going? Are we going? And we said, yeah. And within 3 weeks, we had a team in Germany, $10 million in the bank, and we started to roll on Germany. Right? So.
I must say that, I was super impressed by what the team has done. Because the decision was made, but can you think that really a company can launch in 3 weeks a new country? I mean, that's something that I had never seen before. I mean, our plan was to launch potentially Germany at the end of the year, and we decided to anticipate that launch by 7 months, and it was live in 3 weeks. I mean, that was really amazing.
But I guess Germany is, you'd expect BlablaCar to be in Germany. Russia, with all the complexity of going in there, is a much tougher sell. I don't know, does Nicolas go in and say, we want to launch in Russia, and you go, that's crazy? Or I mean, how does that conversation come about?
Yeah, I mean, well, to some extent, I guess if you do something and it feels logical and very comfortable, it means you're probably too late, right? So when we launched most European countries, France was still very small as a business. It was clearly not comfortable to do that, but in a way it was the right time, right? Because otherwise it would have been too late. And Russia was a funny case because we had met a company actually in Ukraine with like fantastic entrepreneurs targeting both Ukraine and Russia. And I fell in love with the guys. I mean, like fantastic entrepreneurs, super smart. And we said, okay, it was almost opportunistic, right? We thought Russia is a big market. We need to get into Russia. So we went into the board actually with Fred and Francis, and we said, okay, we found this company in Ukraine and we want to launch Russia. And initially, it's a pretty bold decision, right? Because everything is going well, we're building Europe.
Right.
So you have, if you think rationally, you would think like, why would you bet the farm on going into Russia? There is a conflict, by the way, between Ukraine and Russia right at that time, so it sounded all a bit crazy. So why would you bet the farm to go into Russia when things are doing so well in Europe? We can grow the company like 10, 20 times in Europe. It doesn't sound very logical. So we had like a whole debate around that. And at the end, I think what's always been very powerful, and I guess as part of this relationship, as part of the relationship between the board and the founders, is we always accepted to make bold decisions and like risky decisions to some extent, even though things are doing well.
Right.
And Russia was part of that. And now if I think of the consequences of that decision, so we launched Russia like 18 months ago, like a bit more than a year ago, and amazing success, right? So we've seen like amazing traction in Russia. We get excited about emerging markets. And after that, we acquired a company in Mexico, we launched India, we launched Turkey, we're gonna launch Brazil in a couple of months. And today we see 50% of the new members on BlablaCar are coming from these markets we opened just like 12 months ago. And probably that would not have happened if we had not made that bold decision actually on Russia.
Philippe, just to ask you, sometimes the investor is seen as the money man, the person that writes the check, but how do you add value beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, obviously the money is a big part of it because that's how we can, survive as a fund is by providing great return. But, at the core of what we're trying to achieve here, we're trying to back entrepreneurs and companies who are trying to reinvent the world. And our goal is to help this company just always go to the next steps, And so I was, prepared this discussion yesterday night. I was looking at the investment memo that I wrote in 2011, which was interesting because it was a look back at what, 4 years ago I thought what was, could be achievable. And the memo was all about, well, they're successful in France. Maybe if we're lucky, it's going to work in 4 or 5 European countries. And in my scenario analysis, it was like, potentially there's 1% chance that this company is going to be worth 450 million euro at some point.
A 1% chance.
A 1% chance. Right. So, obviously either I've been extremely lucky or I was wrong. But what was interesting, I mean, to me is that this was not about building a European, I mean, the way I was thinking about it is, step one, let's show that it can work in Europe. And as soon as we thought that it could work in Europe, and say, okay, great, now what's the next thing? And let's try these emerging markets. And that's why, so in the, in the way we try to help the companies was, try to scour the market and identify, this potential acquisition because we thought it worked in Italy. And say, well, maybe we can replicate the same thing in other countries. And that's how we found these companies in Russia, Ukraine, and say, well, maybe now is the time to do it. And the great thing is that, with the alignment we had with Nicolas and the team, it was like, sure, let's do it. Right. And then let's try, let's convince the board that it's the right thing to do.
Right, and largely how you've grown to this kind of unicorn status is to boldly enter market after market after market and try and do this. And the way you've gone about doing it, and you've described, is to acqui-hire. You haven't tried to set up a huge team. You've always gone and looked for a good team that you can go in. At some point, though, that must be risky. How do you go about doing that and still maintaining the kind of internal culture of the company and the kind of the wider strategy? What do you do to make that work?
Yeah, so it's one of the key challenges. So in a way, I think that's one of these acquire strategies, probably one of the untold secret of many companies for growth, right? So if you look at like many of the iconic companies in Silicon Valley, like Google or Amazon or many others, they've been very acquisitive, right? Google acquires a company every week or every other week, right? So in a way, we thought the fastest way to get into these markets might be to set up a team there, or it might be that there are some fantastic entrepreneurs like in Ukraine, like in Italy, like in Poland, and then we should just team up. So the key for us was not to screw up the first one or two, right? Because if you screw up the first one, then you're probably dead and you're going to have a hard time to replicate. The first one was a great success in Italy. Then we've done Poland, and then we've done 8 of those, right? So in a way, as a pretty young company, as a startup, we acquired 8 companies in Europe, right? So it's been pretty critical. And you're right, one of the key right now is how do you keep culture, right? Because you bring all these entrepreneurs that building their own company. So today at BlablaCar, I think we have something like 40 or 45 entrepreneurs out of a team of like 350 people. So it's like very entrepreneurial. How do you keep culture? And that's something we've been focusing on for the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years, is building like a very strong set of values, very strong culture within the company, lots of mobility within the company. So we bring like all the local teams back to the HQ almost every 6 or 7 weeks. We allow people actually to go and work abroad whenever they want, like 1 week a year. So we have like all these programs essentially to foster culture, to make sure like we cross-pollinate culture across the organization, and we move people around. People travel a lot, actually.
But they also have to accept certain things. These are entrepreneurs with hopes and dreams of themselves, and they get kind of subsumed into the BlablaCar way of life and thinking. There must be more that you have to do to keep them satisfied. Yes, there's a money side of things, but what else can be done to make everyone kind of happy being part of that environment?
Yeah, so I guess one of the key for us was, and I've always been like a big proponent of that, was like give lots of autonomy to your local teams, right? So essentially, if you want smart people in Russia, if you want smart people in wherever you want to go, right, you need to give them some high level of autonomy. So essentially, we created this very sort of multi-local culture where countries are run not independently because same brand, same product, same technology, but essentially it's very much like an autonomous local team with a country manager, and they make lots of decisions actually locally. So that's how we kept like local autonomy, and yet we have like global brand and very consistent brand across all the countries.
I mean, one thing also I think in terms of branding that BlablaCar has done, which is very powerful, is that you have formalized into 10 or 12 cards, with kind of things like it's better done than perfect, things like this, which are across all the walls of the company. And I think to me that's also something that contributes really to imprint the right culture to the team in the different offices.
And I think one thing to add is going back to this acquisition strategy, is in a way we also acquired these companies because we shared the same dream, right? So fundamentally we had the same vision. We want to disrupt transport on a global scale. And the fact that we had this shared vision initially helps a lot, right? So we go in the same direction, then you adapt sort of your company culture to local companies.
Okay, well, it was clearly some fruitful skiing sessions that you had all those years ago. Thank you, Nicolas, and thank you, Philippe.
Thank you.
Thank you.